Hey everyone, it is Monday night. It's 8 p.m. on the East Coast. You are here at Litvak Leadership Live. We've got a great episode tonight. I'm going to be bringing out my friend Stephen J. Robertson, and we're going to talk about millennials, Gen Z, a little bit about Generation Alpha, and how we, Gen X, and the boomers, it's all about us changing. Because if we want to continue on as a society, as a church, as faith-filled people, as business people in the secular world, it's the boomers and the Gen Xers that need to change. That's where we're going tonight. So first off, though, if you have not liked and followed Litvak Leadership on YouTube and all the other social media, what are you waiting for? Please do that. You also know about my book, Proverbs for Leadership. You can get it at proverbsforleadership.com or on Amazon. And something new, I'd love to have you be a part of the Proverbs for Leadership community. Just go to bit.ly, type in Litvak community, just like it's there, bit.ly/Litvak community, and you can be a part of the Proverbs for Leadership and Litvak leadership community. And frankly, I really would like to see the Gen Z and the millennials joining in, because I want to learn from you too. So without any further ado, let me bring out my friend Stephen J. Robertson. Stephen, how are you doing this evening?
Wonderful, Sean, and so excited to be with you again tonight. Thank you for having me.
I am so happy to have you here. Now, Stephen's written a book, and you've got a copy there, right? Hold it up for everyone, because I did put up a website.
Now,
all right.
It's the right way around.
Aliens Among Us. And what's the subtitle with the Z?
10 Surprising Truths About Gen Z.
And, you know, Gen Z is interesting. And can tell me they can get the book at your website, stephenjrobertson.com?
They can indeed.
Excellent. Excellent. So as a father of a millennial and a Gen Z, it has really become apparent to me, because we've been talking about your appearance for a little over the past week, as I've started thinking about my children, my daughter, my son, my son's wife. My son and his wife are millennials. They are the youngest almost of the millennials. And our daughter is the oldest of the Gen Z. And here's the thing, I've been reading about the generational differences, and I thought they were just different. No, they are like classic differences, just being born a few years apart. So before we leap into the real meat, why is there such a difference between those two, generations?
Wow. Sean, that's a really good question. And honestly, usually when I do keynote speaking or corporate training, that's where we begin, honestly, because we look at a generation like Gen Z and we look at Alpha and we think like, what's going on with them? That's why I called my book Aliens Among Us. I want you to realize that they're aliens, right? I want you to think of them differently. But what's fascinating is if you go through every generation, from the greatest generation, that's about 120 years old right now, greatest generation, silent generation, the boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, every single generation flips primarily based on a technology or a grouping of things that are different in their time, right? And so when you look at it starts as early as the radio and television for the greatest generation, and then it goes to the Hoover Dam, microwave and TV for the boomers. Gen X was the PC, millennials, the internet, and Gen Z, the smartphone. And so those things, plus a whole lot of other things, what they really do is they fundamentally change the way you engage with one another, what you value, how you actually live life day to day. And you go through every one of those generations and you see that is why they behave differently than previous generations. And we like, oh, this younger generation. No, they have a different set of forces that have come from them. And I have an analogy about colors. If we get to that, I can share it with you. But that this generation, Gen Z, have never known life without technology completely being connected. And that's important because this is access to all things. The big difference, Just in this thing I'm showing you right now, the telephone, millennials use this as a toy. Gen Z use it as a tool. That doesn't sound like a big deal, but that just gives you a sense of how a technology and a number of other things can come to play and really change a generation. And so millennials are really different. Gen Z are the first generation to be wired completely differently to the generations that came before them.
So is it like with Gen Z? So I remember growing up, yes, there were giant floppy disks, okay? And that's when I was in high school. Then they went eventually to the smaller, still floppy disks, then the hard floppy disk. But what was before all of that was cable TV. And in the community in which I grew up, the block that I lived on, some block had to be wired first. We were the very first block in our community. And we weren't on the edge of town. We were like kind of in the middle. We were the very first block to get wired for cable TV. I didn't see MTV on day one. I saw it on day two. And it just opened up a world. So my question is that what it is like for Gen Z? What it is for Gen Z, is it what it was for me with cable TV?
In some ways, I'd say yes. In other ways, I'd say no, Sean. So that's a very good answer, right? Yes and no. The yes part is technology in Moore's law, the doubling time of technology. That's not exactly what Moore's law is, but the doubling time of technology is so rapid right now that it is really difficult to stay abreast of all this. The aha moment with technology isn't there for Gen Z because they've only ever lived in a time where the technology is so ubiquitous, right? But there are other things that are that same aha moment for Gen Z as they're growing up, right? And the interesting part of that journey is that what you'll see is that they, through their spending power and through their attention power, are determining what the next aha moment is, which a lot of businesses aren't getting just yet. They will soon enough. So it's similar to that. They certainly do have those moments, but I do think that those pinnacles of like incredible moments have flattened significantly because the doubling time of technology and the changing of our world is so rapid that you hardly get to celebrate something and we're on to the next thing already. So that's a yes and a no.
So, and I want to divert us into the meat of this because what really got me is you had sent me a video, you sent me another video. I watched it the first time, and then I was like, I think I need to watch this again. And in this video, this short video, and you say, that it's raw. Well, okay, the sound quality wasn't great, but nonetheless, you were making your point that, the church, okay, unless it changes. Good evening, Eric. You're going to like this because you have all these kids. So you're going to like this. Unless the church changes, they're going to lose this generation. And I've seen this happen before where churches will either embrace the youth and bring them in and give them authority and change the worship and not be a bunch of old people walking across the platform, okay, but they'll embrace them all in. But I've also seen it where it works and where it doesn't work, and there needs to be a blending. The business world has to figure it out, and there has been a change in the business community where it's not do as I say any longer. It's, well, how do you feel? Well, what do you think? Well, what are other ways to do things? And I don't know if the faith community has picked up on that yet. I know in First Timothy, it says, let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, in purity. But in everyday faith-filled life, in the organized religion of Christianity or the organized religion of my youth when I was a practicing Jew, I don't know if that is actually happening today. What do you say?
Wow, it's a really serious conversation, and that's the reason I sent the video, right? In the secular world, I run a business, and we figured out very quickly how to be successful. Our target audience has always been kids and youth as they go through their years and even into college. And we've seen hundreds of thousands, and I've employed tens of thousands of staff. This summer, we'll have 2,000 seasonal staff working for us. We realized really quickly, Sean, that if I am not paying attention to my customer, there is no way that I will continue to engage them. And that means literally the difference between being in business today and not in business tomorrow. And then just because my wife and I are believers and of faith, we've been fortunate to travel around the world, and we've seen and visited with churches in so many different countries. And the fascinating thing is that some churches are doing it really, really well, and some churches are still figuring it out. But I think the reality is the data speaks for itself. We're in the first post-Christian generation. We're in the first post-Christian time. And what's really urged me to send out this little raw video to say, I've learned a lot in the secular world that is applicable in the church. If you feel like there's something that I can share that would amplify what you're already doing well, I want to do that, because we have proof of concept and we've figured it out. And so the church is struggling. The church is getting older and older, and the youth are not following, right? And that just means that when you get to that point, it's the same as the birth rate. You know, when you get under a 1.6 birth rate in a country, it's irrecoverable. You now have to import labor, right? And so the church is in the same place.
Let me interrupt you for 1 second, because as you talk about that, you know, the church is getting older and older. And I think about churches where the standard operating procedure that I've seen since I was married and since we had children was that the teenagers, what I'm going to call old-fashioned term, junior youth group and senior youth group, back in the day when I was a practicing Jew, the junior youth group were the kids in junior high, i.e. middle school now. The senior youth group were the kids in high school. Now they just have youth in most places, where it's from middle school through high school in one big group. That's a whole nother conversation. But they take them out of the service. And when I was growing up, we may have sat together with our friends, but we were in the same service, the same worship experience, hearing the same message that our parents were hearing. Why has the church embraced I'm going to say, business model where the youth go off somewhere else to hear their own message? I mean, is the pastor's message not good enough for the youth?
Well, that's a trap question. We would hope it is, right? But look, it's a really complicated question. And I want to just say this as a caveat, that every church is unique in the sense that you'd have to navigate it and figure it out by church. But speaking just broadly, right? The fact that the youth have been separated implies to me that they're a pain. Now, the motive would probably be this: we want them to enjoy something that's more suited to them. And
what does that mean? What does suited to them mean? So I'm going to interrupt you a lot. Yeah. When you hear something like that, so does suited to them mean more interesting, more engaging?
I would hope so.
Let's not even say interesting. Let's say more engaging, because the youth needs more engagement. Shouldn't we have more engagement for Gen X and boomers?
Yes. Right. So I think that's the issue. The issue is, what is church really supposed to look like? And I think when you look at the youth, one thing you know about a really young kid is they, out of the mouth of babes, right? They speak the truth, right?
Sure.
because they can see things. And so the point is that if you have a space that's really authentic and they're encountering the kingdom in an authentic way, that is inspiring for any age. That's the point, right?
Yeah.
But what happens is that churches grow and then they get into programs and they're trying to organize things, and you can't fault them for that. There's some value to organizing. Okay, the younger ones go there and we'll play around and we'll do this, and the older ones go here and then we'll have this. So there's a different, it's like a flavor, right? Different flavors that suit different people. That's okay. I think the point is just this, is that I feel like it's become the core focus has been church to the point where youth have been neglected. And we're at a place now that the youth is not returning to church in the way that they were, which means the ultimate demise of church is on its way, unless they can catch a new vision, a different perspective, and start to rethink that. There's a lot of challenges. If you look at any corporate business that's gone through what we've just gone through with COVID, and they've
Yeah.
survived coming out the other side, the chances are they're doing a whole lot really different. The church is at that place right now. We're in the changing of an age. What your Sundays used to look like, and it might have been spectacular, will probably have to change because Gen Z are fundamentally different, and they will make
How?
up the majority.
How are they fundamentally different? I know how I think they're fundamentally different. They use this as a tool. I just spent the weekend visiting our daughter, my wife and I, and everywhere we went, she wasn't obsessed with her phone. That's not what I'm saying at all. But we would figure out where we're going to go because we were walking all over, and she would look and go, "Okay, we're going this way. Okay, we're going that way." Super comfortable with the tool in her hand.
And you said it, it's a tool, right? And that's the point. It's a tool. It's like a car, like a horse. It's something that you use on a daily basis. The list of things that make them fundamentally different is incredibly long. There are a couple of core things, right? The core things is there is an 8-second filter in place. There is a curated stream in place. They process data and information differently. They use tools differently. They value different things than we did because we've grown up in a different time, truly in a different time. We've got a generation that is looking at the church and seeing some of the things that have happened in the church and saying, why do I want to be part of that? So you've got to understand that the church, if they truly want to reach this generation, has to change their narrative. Now, I'm not trying to say you've got to make something that the Gen Z will buy, but you have to reframe the narrative of what church is, because once they've had a true encounter and they have had some kind of a real, I want to say encounter, they will never be the same again. We know that. That's what the spiritual life looks like.
That's the whole point.
But to get them there is not that easy. When you go to a lot of churches, and I'm saying this really gently and very carefully, a lot of churches, there is nothing happening. It's just a social gathering, right? And dare I say that if you go there, you won't be challenged and you won't be changed. And so as a result, that tree is dead. It's just going through the process of dying, right? And so if we truly, no, and I don't mean that horribly, but it's unfortunately it's true. I've visited a lot of churches, and
Yeah.
and where there's life is, if there's life, a church is growing. If there's life, there's testimony of what's going on at that church. Those are two things every place that I've been that is successful is happening. And where those two things are happening, the youth is engaged and involved every single time.
And it's interesting. So our church held a prophecy conference for 3 solid days where we had different speakers come in each day, prophets of God. And the second night, I had this darling saint of a woman, gray hair, come up to me because at our church, my wife and I lead the greeters ministry. And she came up to me and she said, I have a request. She said, I heard you're leading the greeters. I have a request. I said, sure. She said, can you get someone to turn the music down during praise and worship? It's too loud. And I was like, that's not going to happen. And she said, well, my friend with hearing aids says it's too loud. I said, well, if he's wearing hearing aids, maybe if he took them out, It wouldn't be as loud. She did not like that
I
suggestion.
can imagine.
But the thing that I just don't get is when we looked around the room, okay, for this prophecy event for 3 days, that was, from young to old and everywhere in between, because and I've said this many times on Litvak leadership, or when I've had conversations with people are drawn to the supernatural. You wouldn't have everything you have streaming and on TV if people were not drawn to the supernatural. So why not have them be drawn to the supernatural of Jesus Christ and let it be loud?
Yeah, look, the flavor is always going to be a conversation, right? That's why there's multiple flavors of ice cream. Not everybody likes the same ice cream. But I think when you focus on the core things, the things that really matter, the reason we are having church, the reason we have a conference, a prophetic conference, the reason is because we want to bring people into the kingdom. What is important is this, for them to have an encounter where their lives are radically and forever changed and their course is changed, right? And they are then, from an identity perspective, walking in the true identity that they've been created, right? And that's a beautiful, beautiful experience. Now, the reason people go to different churches is because different flavors happen and people want those, right? So that's
Sure.
okay. And I don't think we're ever going to fix that. There's always going to be somebody that's too hot or it's too cold. And I get that. And that's why my heart goes out to pastors and leaders of churches, because it's difficult to keep the whole crowd happy. I get that. But
Yes.
when your motive is to go after the unreached and reach them, then all those things don't matter, right? It's what does it look like when God shows up in a place, and you can tell. And so I'm telling you now that if we're going to reach a generation that's lost, if we're going to reach a generation, the first post-Christian generation, we have to ensure that the experience is authentic. And it's not about age, it's about an authentic experience. And there is a time and a place for the youth to be in a slightly different place. But it's not about where they are, it's about what you prioritize youth as in your church. If your church prioritizes youth, it will be abundantly, abundantly clear. I've been to a church where they prioritize tithing. It is abundantly clear that that is a priority for them. I've been in a church where they prioritize testimony and it's abundantly clear. When you go
Sure.
to a church where the youth are important, it's not at the cost of everything else, but it is a central theme. And as a result of that, what you prioritize and what you focus on gets bigger. And so when you prioritize on the youth and you value the youth, everybody in the church values them. The old and the young value them. And you can see that. And the results, the fruit is different. Our responsibility as churches, Sean, is really simple. Go after the youth, because we will lose them if we don't.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, absolutely.
so if nothing else, that should be our motive, is to go and get them. If you look at the story of Philip when he goes into the desert and he meets the eunuch, it's a beautiful analogy, right, of Gen Z and old generations. It's amazing that if you look at the Ethiopian, and I'm drawing a parallel here, he comes out of Jerusalem and he's on his way back to Ethiopia, actually to modern day Khartoum. It's a 40-day journey, right? He's on his way back there and he encounters Philip in the desert. The point I'm trying to make is that there's a really good chance that we are not going to encounter Gen Z in church first off. We're going to encounter them in the desert first and then bring them to church. And that's really important, because when the eunuch went to Jerusalem, to the temple,
Right.
he wasn't allowed in, and his questions were not answered. So when he encounters Philip, do you know what you're reading? No, he was desperate to have his questions answered. He went on a pilgrimage to get something sorted out in his heart, right? Would you take a 40-day journey all the way to Jerusalem as a guy from Ethiopia? If you unpack that story, you will see he was desperately searching for something valuable, right? And so the whole point I'm trying to make is we're probably going to have to mobilize ourselves to go out and reach this generation and then bring them into church. When we bring them, that experience is going to continue to be an authentic, real experience that isn't something based on just your age. It's got to be based on a journey you're walking.
And the youth, they look different, they talk different, they engage differently. I mean, I've watched some sounds so old, what am I saying? Darling young couples at our church slowly move from further back in the sanctuary, closer, 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 wearing jeans, wearing t-shirts, okay, but having a heart for God, having a heart to have a supernatural experience. And just this topic this last week, thinking about you being here tonight and spending the weekend with my daughter. And when my wife and I spent the weekend with her, we went to church with her. And if y'all are in New York, go to C3. Love that church. And when I looked around the church, there were people my age. Not a lot, but there were some. At least I assume they were my age because they had gray in their beard like I had in mine. And there were a lot of people my daughter's age and a whole lot of people in between. And I'm looking at this and people earnestly worshiping, a wonderful message that we heard that really got you thinking and encouraged. And I am just, I don't know, this has been a personal rub for me for years about having the youth outside of the main service.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I didn't grow up that way, but we don't have, and I'm talking about Christendom in general, we don't have the main service going on and then have a men's service in another room and have a women's service in another room and have a boomer service in another room. Yes, we have a crying room for babies, but that's altogether a different situation. Why do you think that people look at the youth and say we need to have this youth service as opposed to, well, we need, as opposed to Hasidic Jews that have the men worship on the main floor and the women worship upstairs in the balcony? I know the reasoning behind that, and there's a reason I'm a Christian, okay? But yet in Christianity, we relegate the youth somewhere else. I don't like the message that it says to them. Am I wrong?
So two things can be correct, right? And I think both are correct. There's a time where they should be together in the service, and I think the service should be appropriate for anybody and everybody, 100%. I also think that there's a time where you can take the youth separately and do something that is appropriate for their age, right? And so
are you saying during the service or as a separate event?
So I don't want to answer that because it can be a combination of multiple things. I don't think the youth need to leave the main service. I don't think that they do. But can I tell you why I'm saying both can be correct? Because for me, that is a problem, a granular problem that can be solved down the line. I can tell you what the problem is right now. Most churches don't have youth, right? So I just feel the priority of things, solve that before, because then it's a case of like, should we have coffee or should we have tea? And I'm not trying to belittle what you're saying. I don't mean it like that at all. But I think the reality is we've got to see what the real issues are and address those first. And again, saying it like that makes it sound like yours is not an issue. I don't mean it like that. I believe that if the church was operating like it should,
yeah,
we'd want to be there. I believe that if the pastor, the priest was preaching in a way that was compelling and authentic, that same message touches the heart of a child as it would somebody older. So I think there is something to that. But I do think that just like grades are separated, there's a time and a place where just attention spans and focus and in some cases, bear in mind, the kids have not had the same encounter as adults, right? And so for them to sit and listen to this deep story and the unpacking of it can be really hard, right? So I can tell you this, it was fascinating. There's a church that I'm working with, right? And they actually run out of a school. They own a school, and they've converted the school. So long story short, there's a CEO I'm coaching, and we're talking about his child, and his child always has friends over, and they play Nerf gun wars in the basement. Okay, so long story short, we talk about how he can engage with his child, but I'm speaking to this pastor of this church, and we decide that what a great idea to bring in hay bales into the school and open up the school for a Nerf gun war on a Saturday, right? The whole community comes in. All the kids, they're running, it's mayhem, okay, mayhem. What happens is they stop to have drinks because now they're tired, and the pastor tells them the story of Gideon, right? Where Gideon's army gets cut down to eventually 300 people, and they're like, oh, that's an awesome story, right? Because not just story time, they're tired, they're having drink, snacks, whatever. Then he sets the two groups up to mimic that war, and the 300 Gideonites get slaughtered. And then he gets to come back and he gets to tell them, hey, but the difference was God was involved, right? Next Sunday, guess what? All these kids want to come to church, right? Because of the experience they've had there. Guess who has to come with them? Mom and dad.
Their parents.
Right? So the point I'm making is this. That's a young group that I'm talking about that are playing Nerf gun. But
absolutely,
all I'm suggesting is this. The fruit on many churches is diminishing little bit by little bit. If you look out the window, yes, there's still an apple on the tree, but last year we had 2. Now we're down to 1. What's going on? Is it time to cut down this tree? Right? If you look sincerely at what's going on in a church, you can tell. And I'm telling you now that as in business, that we've had to go through ourselves as businesses, if you don't understand that we truly are in a new time, we're in a new era where it is almost like the Wild West. Everything is upside down. The same rules do not apply anymore. And if we want to continue to bring authentic faith to people, we've got to think of different ways of approaching that process. And we've got to, at the center of that, make sure that the youth are there. 52% of the world's population is under the age of 30. 52% of the world's population.
52%, yeah.
So come on.
Yeah.
And doesn't mean throw everything else away. It just means that there's a prioritizing where a group may not have been prioritized. You have to prioritize them for the right reasons. And the reason that you have to prioritize them is not so church will grow, which it will. It's because they are lost and we are going to lose them if we don't figure out how to go after them. So that's the motive. Once you've got that all sorted out, the nuance of do they stay or do they have a separate service seems much simpler to figure out. But at this moment, I don't care. Just get them there. And what does there look like? Well, at every church, it looks a little bit different. And if you can keep them there, that means you're being authentic and you're going after them in a real way, which is amazing, if we can say that.
Well, and looking at the word, all right, yeah, this is it. From Acts, in the last days it shall be, says God, that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. It wouldn't let me put that many characters in, but I know the end of it. So here's my point. If it says in the word that the number of years, if you desire it, is 120, and I'm 57, am I an old man dreaming dreams? Am I a young man seeing visions? I have sons. I have a son. I have daughters. Okay. They should be prophesying. Okay. Well, if they're doing that and they're off in youth land, doesn't the rest of the church not benefit from the prophesying that is going on? If the young men aren't there seeing visions and being able to talk about them, aren't we cutting off our noses for the sense of entertainment and engagement and keeping things orderly?
Well, the way that you frame that, I would say yes. I think the reality is it probably is a little bit different to that. I don't think it only means the physical age. I think it means the spiritual age. And we should all prophesy, right? I think what's fascinating is that when you go follow Philip from Jerusalem, he ran away. It says that Stephen had marked.
Even more so, though, if it's spiritual age.
What?
Even more so, because most of the spiritual age that are young. Okay, so I was saved in, let me think, 1991.
Maturity and spiritual age are two very different things.
Okay.
Right.
So there can be some very mature, younger spiritual age people.
Yeah. I don't know. The point I'm making is this.
Okay.
Philip leaves Jerusalem. He runs away. Stephen was just martyred by Paul, right?
Mhm.
Everybody was scattered except the apostles. That's what the word in Acts 8 says. And he runs away to Samaria. And in Samaria, there was a guy called Simon the sorcerer. At the time, Simon the sorcerer was the man, right?
Right.
Philip arrives, and all of a sudden, signs, wonders follow him, and people are being wrecked, right? The amazing thing is it doesn't matter the age. It doesn't matter who's doing what at that point. When the kingdom comes crashing in, nobody can ignore it. So if the kingdom is crashing in at the youth group, it won't take long for the adults to want to be part of the youth group, because you said it. We are spiritual beings. We are attracted to that. And so wherever the kingdom happens to be, that is where the focus will be. Now, I think that it takes a brave person to bring youth into a service and ask them to prophesy and share dreams and words. But if they are authentic, that's what should be happening on a regular basis, right? It
Yeah.
shouldn't be a formalized thing. I don't think we're missing out by moving them out of the service or having their own service, because we'll know soon enough. And one day a week is not enough. This should be going on every single day, right? So when it comes time for testimony, that's when the youth should be able to come up and say, hey, I prayed for this person who was sick and now they're better. Or whatever the testimony is, I prophesied over this person. And so again, I don't know if I've addressed the question in the way you wanted to, but look, of course, dream dreams and prophesy. The word says all should prophesy. We should all prophesy. We should all desire to prophesy. And in a church that's healthy, I believe that kind of thing is going to happen.
Yeah, this is why I'm not emperor, because you bring up a good point. So it doesn't have to be exactly the way that I see it, but I think it sounds like what you're saying is that where a lot of churches are missing it is just moving the youth out, putting them in their own place.
Yeah, the churches that I've encountered that are struggling, and I'm not trying to stand in judgment. We're just trying to encourage them from churches that we've seen that have had success, right? And so, like the NFL, it's a copycat league. If you can see something's working and you try it and it's working for you, why not, right? What I've really seen is when a church takes priority of the youth, makes the youth a priority, everything changes. They verbalize to everybody, we love the youth, we're going to go after them, and they make sure that the adults have bought into that process, so that when the youth are doing the videos or the mics, or when they're taking up collection, or when they're part of the meet and greet team, or when they're in the parking lot ushering people in, it's not like, what are these kids doing here? It's a celebration, like, look at our kids are stepping up. And once that happens, there is something that happens within a church in terms of the culture of a church, where they, meaning the youth, are part of the fiber of that church, the fabric of that church. And then the narrative, the message that goes out through those youth to other youth to like come, it's amazing how it happens, because it's authentic. As soon as anything is authentic and real, especially in the spiritual space, you can't contain it, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that we often fall into a process and or formula, and there's nothing wrong with processes and there's nothing wrong with formulas, but to the degree that we don't notice when life leaves that tree, right? And we just continue the process. And that sounds like a heavy judgment, and I don't mean it to be like that. I'm just calling people to have a very realistic look at what's going on. Read the data, read the balance sheet, look at what's going on, and is it the same as it was? Because it shouldn't be, and it should be better. And if it isn't, something probably needs to be adjusted.
Well, and it works both ways. I mean, when you're in a workout situation, or you're on a diet, or you want to make any kind of life change, you need to measure it daily and be willing to understand that you are not going to see any change or just minute change on a daily basis. But when you measure it daily, and when you get to 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and look back at that first day, then you begin to see the change that has occurred.
Right.
But if you don't force yourself, you know, I just recently read, and the language in the book is a little rough. I just finished reading 75 Hard, which it's some, it's a tactical guide to winning the war with yourself. Some people think this is a workout book. Some people think this is a diet book. No, this is a mental attitude book.
Yeah.
And if you do what this gentleman says to do, and part of that is the incremental change, or I'm sorry, the incremental measurements, by recording a picture, when you start looking at the longer period of time, you're going to see the difference. And do you see that when you are working with churches or working with businesses, that they're willing to look at things each and every day or each and every week, and look for patterns?
Yeah. I think when people's perspective change, when they have a change of perspective, I always say this: a change of perspective always precedes a change in behavior, right? So as soon as someone's perspective changes in a business and or in a church, where they say, we're prepared to look at this, we're prepared to, right? It's amazing how quickly things change. Then when you go through whatever data they have, it's amazing how quickly you can start to see, and I don't mean copious amounts of data. It's really, really just simple to track what's going on and what's working, what's not. It's fascinating to see how quickly people will come to the party. The point is really simple. Data helps something not be so personal. Data helps you tell the story that there is without attaching it to somebody or trying to blame somebody for where we are. Data helps you say, well, because this is where we are, our desire is to be somewhere else. Well, how do we get there? And it helps you shift that focus very, very quickly.
Yeah.
The other thing that it helps you do is be tactical about what you want to do. When you have a goal and you write it down, you're 2 times more likely to achieve it.
Absolutely.
If you then add to that a process, you're 4 times more likely to achieve it. If you then preach it from the pulpit, you are 6 times more likely to achieve that. And so all it takes is identifying, like, well, what is the issue we're trying to solve? Do we really feel like we want to go after the youth more than we are? Okay, well, now you can solve for that, right? So what are we going to do, and how are we going to go about making that a process that is valuable to us and that we can measure to see that it's working? Because you'll know really, really quickly. Anybody that's in service at a church, you can ask them the truthful questions about, give me a temperature on this and this and this, and they will tell you. Even a blind person can tell you the atmosphere that goes with any of these things associated with your church, right? Even in a business. And so it's the willingness to say, we don't want to continue being where we are. We want to be somewhere different. How do we get there? And that's really the motive, because I don't want for one moment anybody to think that what we've done in the past is broken and wrong. The point is just this: we are in a changing of an age, and that's why the fruit that was being produced last year just doesn't seem to be happening this year. And that's the aha moment, right? That's why you've got to realize that there is a generation, 52% of the world, that is just wired differently. And they look at things, engage, speak, value differently. And if you want them to be your customer, which is okay to begin with, because we believe if they were our customers, they're going to encounter the kingdom, right? So that's okay. That motive, I think, helps you change. So perspective is such a big thing. And I think every church is truly very different. There's all these unique components that make up a church, which takes just a little bit of time to listen to those stories and synthesize, well, what does it mean and what do we believe we need to do next? And I've seen a couple of people do that really, really successfully. It just takes somebody or a group of people that are deliberately going after something. And that's exactly what that book shows you. If you've got that mindset change and you deliberately go after something, it'll happen. And I'm grateful and fortunate to say that I've seen it, which is why I sent that video, because what we've experienced in the world, I'm desperate to share with any church or youth group some of the learning, because it might be applicable to them. And if it is, and you bring in 1 or 2 more youth, come on, that's great.
Yeah, I everything you said makes complete sense to me. And it's a matter of people need to be willing to change. And they, it's like my book says, you need to understand yourself and improve if you desire leadership that produces success in others. Well, the mission of the church is to introduce people to Jesus Christ so they will have eternal life in heaven and have heaven here on earth and live a life where they are not tormented by not only making Jesus their savior, but also their Lord, so he can direct them and you can have a relationship with him and have a much more enjoyable life. And I just firmly believe that part of that is, for the most part, is having the youth in the service with you, because then we cannot, because they can not only learn from the older men and the older women, but we can learn from them and what kind of move of God, what God is saying to them.
And Sean, if God is moving in your services, that's the only place to be, right?
Absolutely.
And if He's not, keep them separate, because maybe there's a move in the youth group, right? So, no, I'm being serious.
Oh, yeah.
It depends. If your church is really going after the kingdom, of course that's where they need to be. Again, I just think there's so many scenarios that it's a much bigger conversation than that. But once you start the journey on a slightly different path, all the other things, some of them solve for themselves, and other things then become priorities very quickly so that you can solve for them. That's the natural course of problem solving. Once you prioritize, some things just fall away because they're automatically solved, and other things then get shifted up. And so, depending a little bit on where a church is, I know that in case of your kids, you don't have to send them to youth group. You can keep them there. I just want to make sure that if you're going to keep them with you, the stuff that's happening there is compelling enough to keep them coming. Because here's the thing, they will only keep coming so long for you. And if there isn't compelling encounters and authentic things going on, they will not continue. And I can't say I blame them, right? And so that's the challenge before leaders of churches, is to is this a real and authentic experience? Because otherwise, what are we asking people to be a part of, right?
Well, and it's not just, and this is not a dig on the church, what I'm about to say. It's not just have something compelling for the youth for them to keep coming back, but for the men's ministry, because every church has a men's ministry. For the women's ministry, when they meet as women, there needs to be something compelling to get people to keep coming back and be looking forward to it. If it's just sitting around and drinking coffee or whatever it is you drink and having a snack, that's not compelling, because you can do that elsewhere and probably have just as much fun.
Yeah, that's a harsh thought. I think, unfortunately, the older crowd, them coming to church, is their gathering and coming together. So when I say compelling, I'm not trying to talk about things that are dramatic. I'm talking about just something authentic, right? That's all I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to say it needs to become a circus. That's not that's not my heart and not what I'm saying. And I think we're both saying the same thing, right? The reason that we want people to come to church is to have an encounter, to meet Jesus, right? That's the point. And I know that the gathering together of the brethren, there's a purpose. That corporate worship, there should be nothing like it.
Yeah.
That's why it's corporate worship. You can't corporately worship on your own at home, right? So that experience should be dramatic and exciting and amazing, and I dare say loud, and it should be a celebration. And whatever else happens, that's the flavor. The youth, are they there? Great. If they're not there, I hope something great's going on where they are. But I hope they're there on the property somewhere. That's what I'm most concerned about.
Yeah, they got to begin there. Well, we have gone almost an hour, 49 minutes, and we've had a good group here, a pretty silent group, but a good group of people here most of the time. So thank you very much. If you want to find out more about what Stephen's doing, check out his website, stephenjrobertson.com. You can also email him at bebold@stephenjrobertson.com. And frankly, if you're like, well, Sean, I want to talk to you, there's my email address also. Stephen, thank you so much for being a repeat guest on Litvak Leadership Live. I love this topic. I have a real heart for those that are younger than me, that they would learn from the experiences of those older and not make the same mistakes. But you have opened my eyes up to the fact that I need to change if I want to help them change.
Come on. Thank you, Sean.
All right. That's it, everybody. Be happy, be well, be blessed in all you do, and we will see you next week.